Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Jorge Riscas, co-founder and CEO of Bops. Welcome to Product Availability Podcast, where we cut through the noise and focus on how do we help retailers and CPGs keep products on the shelf, online, and available for consumers. Today, I'm excited and thrilled to have Colin Peacock. You're the current director of ECR Retail Loss. I'm also a big fan of you, Colin. You spent almost 30 to 40 years in the industry trying and tackling on-shelf availability. From my perspective, I think you were in Procter & Gamble, so I'll let you introduce yourself, Colin, for the audience, and super happy to have you here.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Yes, I guess I was adding up the sums. It's nearly 40 years in the sort of retail industry. Most of that, with a CPG, Procter & Gamble, as you said. Started out as a salesman back in 1984, a field sales representative in the UK, when there probably were 200 of us visiting Asda, visiting Sainsbury's, Tesco stores to check on orders. Then became part of ECR. It stands for Efficient Consumer Response. We have a retail loss group. We have inventory record inaccuracy and out of stocks are two of the 8 working groups that we work on. We have 400 retailers who are part of it, and we produce research every year. This year we'll produce something like 8 or 9 new research papers, everything from the true cost of food waste, the journey on QR codes, through to staff dishonesty, and then our on-shelf availability. So a wide variety of work. So yeah, I'll talk with both hats on, swap around, but we have, as I said, 400 retailers who are part of that group. So glad to be here.
Thank you for sharing. And just before we get started with some of the questions that we do have, what was the fire or your motivation to really go deep into on-shelf availability? You have talked about this concept for a while. It's been 20, 30 years. You have done some of the best researches that exist in the retail CPG industry. So what was the fire behind it? We'd love to kind of get your take on that.
I don't know. I wish I knew where it all started. But I suppose in truth, my very first day as a sales rep, I was told that, you've just got to do a couple of things right. Make sure the product's in distribution, make sure it's on the shelf in the right part of the shelf and at the right price, and your job is done. And that's really been sort of like, been carrying on trying to do that for an awful long time. And I suppose that, that if that was one catalyst, that would be the case. I think the other one probably was just in my marketing career, and I noticed that a lot of the products, the high value products, were not on the shelf. Whether that's Jack Daniels or some of the P&G products, and I sort of looked around and realised that that wasn't any one person's responsibility. So there were lots of different ways you could tackle those problems. A lot of ways to interpret the causes of the problems, but there wasn't many people sort of like looking to join up all the dots. And so, through the different parts of my work, I've been trying to join the dots up, because as we talk in the group, it's about sell more and lose less. And the problem of loss, is very much linked to inventory record inaccuracy. And the causes of inventory record inaccuracy are, wrong deliveries, mistakes, wrong scanning at the self-checkouts, people stealing stuff being broken but not being recorded. And so I guess, that also got me into it, just seeing that no one really was looking at bringing it all together. And also perhaps misinterpreting the problem. So thought to bring some academics to the group, so that we can have an academic and an evidence-based understanding of the problem.
That's perfect. So spot on. So from an end-to-end perspective, and based on your experience, I'm assuming this concept of on-shelf availability and also online availability for kind of the new omni-channel and e-commerce retailers have evolved. Can you go deep into, has there been progress on who the owner is of on-shelf availability? What are your perspectives of who should own on-shelf availability from a CPG and also retailer lens? Tell us a little bit about the involvement of this concept and also the practice to tackle this concept, because as you and I know better, if we improve on-shelf availability, we'll be increasing sales. And we could also bring some cost reductions from a retailer and CPG perspective. So I would love to hear your thoughts here.
Well, Jorge, you're firing a whole lot of interesting questions my way. A bit off script, but hey, I'll get to some of those if I can remember all of them. So keep me honest here. I think the first thing I'd like to say is that, you know, how we measure on-shelf availability is somewhat arguable. So, you know, there's lots of different ways in which we can get a metric around that. And so we do spend an awful lot of time as industry and in companies arguing over the metrics. You know, do you go and do, you know, shelf caps? You know, if you instruct people to do shelf caps, how do you make sure there's not some bit of, you know, marking your own homework? You know, then do you use, you know, lost sales and POS data? Do you use online grocery ordering, you know, and the pick rates? Do you use inventory from the warehouse? Do you start to look at shelf images? So there's a lot of debate about the number, and I don't wish to too much to spoil the surprise of you'll get from the new research from ECR that Professor Daniel Corsten is leading, and that'll be out hopefully before Christmas. But, you know, on the face of it, we haven't made much progress. That said, you know, we've put an awful lot more complexity into the system, and we've taken an awful lot of labour out. So have we made progress? Probably not. But it could have been a lot worse, perhaps, given the complexity and the constraints we've put against it. And labour is the key one. Everywhere around the world, not only is there less supply to retailers of hourly associates, but the cost of those hourly associates is going up tremendously. And we've seen that in North America, you know, where they're now advertising $20 as a minimum hourly rate. You know, it's not too long ago, I remember it being more like 10 or 12. And so it's the hourly rate has gone up, but also just the population change has meant there's not as many people, you know, in the pool of 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds who want to come and work, you know, in retail. They'd rather do Uber jobs or be an influencer or, you know, other areas of work.
And this labor, just to make sure that we could kind of simplify it to the terms, is a person that it's either subcontracted by a CPG or a retailer to ensure that they're restocking the product from the back room into the shelf, but they're also ensuring that the product has accurate numbers, for example. Is that the labor you're kind of referring towards?
Well, I was referring actually to had my retailer hat on there and thinking more about the store and the retailer. To your point about, you know, the store, the CPG. You know, back in 1984, as I said, there were 200 sales reps, and their job was to go in, count the inventory, and make a suggested order that the store manager would say, yes, I'll sign off, after having kept you waiting outside there for about 3 hours. But that was the joy of being a sales rep back in the day. We then moved, as you know, to inventory, perpetual inventory systems and sales-based ordering, and there's been, you know, less of a need for sales, and I'm talking about maybe the sort of modern retail trade. There's still other aspects, but modern retail trade, and I'm probably talking about Europe, and I'm talking about UK and North America, Australia probably, because I know that South America is different. I think there's much more provided labour by the CPGs, but broadly, you know, in Europe, in those countries I mentioned, the CPGs, you know, there was no need for the CPGs to call on the stores. so as they move to sales-based ordering, because the systems ordered themselves. So why do we need to create an order? But what we've learned in those markets is that the inventories soon become inaccurate, and you've seen some of our studies. 60% of inventory records are wrong, and this is down to all the factors I mentioned before. Wrong scanning. I mean, self-checkout is perhaps maybe 40% of the reason why inventory records are inaccurate, according to one study. Supply chain, we've sped the supply chain up, we've reduced cost in the supply chain, removed the emphasis on quality. Maybe 35% of the inventory record inaccuracies could be seen to be upstream in terms of being. So we're seeing these things affect the inventory record accuracy, and that in turn impacts the replenishment and leads to shelf out of stock, and or carrying extra inventory and buffer inventory for online ordering. So I realize we're going around and around, but there's a lot going on in this space, and the output, what we want, which is the right product at the right shelf at the right time, think of that as quality, and what we've got here is a quality problem, and it's how we address that quality problem together.
And if I summarize, then there's been an increase in complexity, especially in the retail CPG industry, for many reasons, as you mentioned, right? We've gone into e-commerce, less labor at the stores.
Returns.
We could call about the quick commerce as well. The Instacarts and of the world are going into the store. We got more shoppers going in, and now off the script question is, have the awareness around on-shelf availability increased for retailers and CPGs to mandate or have more ownership than what has happened in the past or what they had before? Is that something you are seeing, again, both lens, CPGs or retailers? Does the pressure of Amazon and other retailers, that Amazon in just one click have the product available in same day or next day, is it having an impact for other retailers or even CPGs to say, I need to make sure my product is available when the consumer wants it?
Well, I think to take it from the retailer side, I mean, one of the things that when you have problems this complex, you do think there's a role for a czar, someone in charge. So, and overseeing the whole piece. So the problem of shrink, for example, tends to have an asset protection team, a loss prevention team. It's a pyramid. There's a head of loss prevention, and that's because the shrink number is aligned on the P&L in part. On-shelf availability isn't aligned in the P&L, so it tends not to. It's everyone's job, and it's not a project. Is words that a CEO of a major top 10 retailer in the world said to me once. This is a project. It's what we do every day. This is our job. So it's a bit different to some of the ways we would traditionally tackle this from a CPG or even an industry point of view, and that's because it hasn't got that sort of line on the P&L that says on-shelf availability. We've got food waste, we've got labour, we've got shrink, but there's nothing on there that sort of says on-shelf availability. And it's difficult to measure, and it's easy for CEOs, and Sir Terry Leahy wrote about this in his book. He was told that his on-shelf availability was 99%. Now they're using one of the slacker measures, maybe more of on-shelf availability. Maybe inventory, for example, is a very good way to get a high on-shelf availability number. Just what percentage of orders are you shipping? What percentage of the on-hands you've got on the store. If you've got at least one, you're in stock, sort of thing. So, but then he saw through his online business that the first time pick rate, was closer to sort of, mid 80s. And that's when you start to, and that's where they started to make some real progress. But it's a huge problem. For the CPGs, I think it's pretty much the case that the sales team, the ones, when I started in 1984, it was down to me. Why wasn't that product on the shelf when I went to see the store? Well, you visited the store. Why wasn't it there? Didn't you order enough? Did you not? So I think the sales team sort of do end up sort of owning the problem, and as you say, they invest, in field resources to visit the stores, talk to the store managers, the department managers, correct the inventories, and that work clearly pays off for the CPGs. So I think that's the piece that's good. You asked a question about, which I thought was actually misconceptions, and I think one of the, I suppose, as CPGs, we kind of like to think that our problem of out of stocks is really important for store managers, and the truth is that for many of the CPGs, especially in categories that might not be the most important categories for the store manager, like health and beauty or ambient, this really isn't the most important thing of their day. They're worried about people getting injured, they're worried about people slipping up, they're worried about whether people are turning up to work, whether they're actually making some new recruits, whether the checkouts are on, whether they're going to have a fire safety check that day, whether the delivery is all going to get out. And apart from a few critical items like milk or chicken, even if your area manager came round, they'd probably forgive you in health and beauty if a few items were out of stock, if everything else was looking great. And who knows, you can just cover some of the gaps over as well, and with the area manager notice. Yep. I think one misconception is that that on-shelf availability is as important to the retailer or the store manager as it is to any CPG.
And would you say on-shelf availability matters more for the CPG than the retailer? Is that a fair kind of assumption? Meaning, if my product as a brand or a CPG, it's not on the shelf, most likely as a consumer, the consumer is gonna kind of replace or substitute that product. That not always is the case when I'm a retailer. I might just get the sale with my even own white label product or other brands. However, there's still an impact, right? As a consumer, we want to make sure when we go to the retailers, that the brands that we like are there. I'm assuming it could be somewhere around a 40% impact. So is that a fair statement? Obviously, you have way more data behind it, but we'd love to get your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think Thomas Gruen and others put together the sort of the Bible, whatever it was, but 30 years ago. Absolutely. Depending on what category, there's high substitutability. What's perhaps quite telling is that where retailers have really invested in RFID is in on-shelf availability is in a category like clothing and sports, where on-shelf availability is critical. If you're selling red dresses, you can't, someone who wears a size 12 is not going to buy a size 14 or a size 10. So it's really critical for those categories like sports and apparel. And that explains why I think they've invested at Walmart and Target and Tesco and others so heavily in RFID in those particular categories, because they've got low substitutability and they're really difficult to count. One red dress looks like another red dress. So I think there are certain categories that are more important to the retailer, it's really critical to the retailer. But to your point, there are some that are less critical, where they can see the sort of there can be substitutions. Bananas can't be substituted, so you need to be in stock of bananas. Milk, difficult to sort of I have orange juice instead. It doesn't really work, does it? But so I would agree with your statement. For many CPGs, on-shelf availability is really, really important. But that sense of importance and priority, depending on what category, may not be shared by the retailer because of substitutions.
Spot on. So if we talk a little bit about the challenges around on-shelf availability, and we talked a little bit about lack of ownership, lack of an integrated end-to-end way of solving it. Are there any other challenges? And if not, we double click into kind of the first two that I just mentioned.
Well, yeah, there's huge challenges. If you want, typically the contacts that a CPG would have with a retailer are with the commercial team, or maybe the distribution team responsible for bringing in products into the distribution centre, so they want to have a really high service level. But the people who really make the difference on the shelf and on-shelf availability are in the replenishment teams, and they're in the category management teams setting the planograms, and they're in the stores. And it's not always easy to influence some of those teams or know who those teams are, especially in operations and in the sort of the supply chain world. It's the distribution centres do get measured on service levels to stores, but seeing that data, seeing the people, helping those people, it's not so easy. But yeah, ongoing challenges. Data sharing, I think, is something that needs to happen a lot more to take some of the work away from the stores. Getting signals, and quicker understanding of where products, are out of stock. I love some of the work that Unilever have done. The ice cream people have done it more specifically on the coolers and putting the cameras in the coolers. I think that there's a pet food company that's done the same thing. I really quite like that. So you can monitor the cabinets and place orders via the phone based off automatically. I think those are quite neat solutions. But no, I think it's a question of, for CPGs, this is our work, and they need to help retailers keep their inventory records accurate, for their categories, by visiting the stores that need their most help.
Spot on. Is there a big, if I just kind of digest a bit of what you just mentioned, is there a silver bullet? And again, from an organization, don't forget about technologies. I think there are many technologies that are up and coming, from shelf camera robots, analytics, which are improving the on-shelf availability measurement. But from fixing the problem and ensuring accountability, is there a silver bullet that us in the industry could try to enforce? And I know you've been doing this for a while, but what else can we do, especially going towards the future?
Well, I think maybe that we like doing, because every study tells you that people who are engaged and who want to do this work and will follow up and make sure the shelf is empty, have ownership for their department. That works. That is the silver bullet. And that can overcome technologies. I was just reviewing one of our old research projects with Professor Daniel. We did a research project about 8 years ago where we looked at the responses from 250,000 store associates across 3 retailers, and we were looking at out of stock levels per store. And what we found is, we divided into quartiles. The stores, with the lowest store associate engagement had much higher levels of out of stocks. And if we could just get those store associates to be as engaged as the other 3 quartiles, we could reduce out of stocks by 20%. So if you want a silver bullet, let's put labor in there. Now, there is an optimal amount of labor that you have, and too much of it is not productive. But I work with Marshall Fisher and Santiago and others, out of Wharton, and this was the number one finding. Put more dollars in and you will grow on-shelf availability. But we prefer technology solutions. They're much more sexy. But you asked about silver bullet. But yeah, do I think that the use of data science and looking at POS and inventory trends, I think that can make a huge difference. I think we can automate a lot of the corrections that need to happen to inventory records without, if you like, bothering the store. And I think that is certainly an intervention that we've heard from Target, and we've heard from Walmart and from other retailers around the world that they're implementing and they're getting good success, albeit with some caution that you don't build up too much inventory by perhaps lowering your confidence levels in those algorithms, if you like. But I certainly over the last decade or so, that's probably been the most promising new intervention, which is looking to how to predict wrong inventory records and then based off those predictions auto-correcting rather than asking someone to spend 10 minutes researching why this item's got no sales but 12 units on hand.
In that particular case, I see it as phantom or ghost inventory automatic adjustments. We will need to have the owners of the perpetual inventory, which are the retailers in the majority of the cases, to kind of have a process in place to do that. But absolutely, it will have a tremendous impact on on-shelf availability. I also want to kind of summarize, because I think you mentioned, right, if I'm a CPG leader, absolutely we got to put labor into kind of solving this problem, especially for kind of the categories that we're playing on. And a combination of optimizing that labor with technology. Again, it could be data science, it could be analytics, it could be shelf cameras that are giving us better insights to measure OSA, but also insights to kind of deploy labor where it's needed and where I'm going to have the most impact. I think that's the challenge that we need to solve. And I also want to kind of share a bit of experience from a CPG perspective. You said it very well. A lot of the ownership have been within kind of the sales and commercial teams, but more and more we're trying to put a lot of emphasis with supply chain leaders that it's just not about on time in full. It is important, but that's just a core piece of on-shelf availability. Our job needs to finish once the product is on the shelf and the consumer is buying it, and that's another point of, I'll say, organizational challenge that we're facing as we go.
Yeah, and retailers drive that. They drive their vendors to have 99.999% distribution service levels, in, and yet the shelf is running at sort of 90%, 10% empty. And so I do think there's a lot more emphasis that needs to be placed on going from 99.1 to 99.9 is very expensive, a huge investment that needs to be taken. And, like with labor, you can have too much of it. And maybe there's too much emphasis on that sort of distribution center service levels, and there should be more emphasis, on, the output measure, which is the sort of on-shelf availability. And perhaps more CPGs will go down that route. But also, I think there's another piece that needs to be taken into account, which is the planogram design. And too often, what we're seeing when we're looking at inventory, with retailers' data, they got 10, 15, 20% of all the inventory in the stores in the back room. It wasn't that long ago that our friends at Toyota came and sort of looked at supermarkets and thought, what a beautiful system they got here, just in time. What they didn't realise is that, we've got to put 20% of it in the back room, whereas they've actually done proper just in time. And so we do need to look at why we got so much in the back room, and that puts a back an emphasis on the planogram in terms of, we really should only be shipping from what comes from the distribution centre should go straight on, one touch onto the planogram. And so I do think there's a lot more discipline requirement, joined up thinking around that piece, because it costs about $1 a case to bring stuff out the back and put it on the shelf, whereas it doesn't really cost that much by putting it straight onto the shelf. And does it really make sense to have such a huge assortment that you can't fit it all on the shelf and say it all has to go in the back? So I think we need to take a really good hard look at the back rooms, because I'm pretty sure that those stores that have the greatest amount of product in the back room have the worst on-shelf availability.
Spot on, because it's just so hard when you go into a back room of one of these big retailers, and I'm pretty sure you've been in the back room. There's so many products, it's hard to get in, and that's a very interesting concept of doing just in time. We'll have to think about how do we rethink supply chains to ensure that they're a little closer? We got shorter lead times to get the products in there at the time the consumer needs them, just to make sure that we protect against spikes. But if we could do it for some categories, absolutely we'll save a lot of labor to get that product into the shelf.
Well, I can see the request going into ChatGPT now. I've only got this. I've got 4 feet of shelf space. This is how much each of them sells. This is how the case size comes from the distribution center. How many items can I carry without putting stuff going into the back room? Given I've got a delivery every 1 week. So you'd think that's a perfect question for ChatGPT. Absolutely.
Colin, just to finish up, so let's just assume I have a 92% of on-shelf availability, meaning I have an 8% of out of stocks, and I really want to get towards greater than 95%. Is it doable, and is it cost effective to do this? If I get to 96, 97% in on-shelf availability, is this going to be a big revenue driver, or is there going to be a big ROI to do this from a CPG perspective?
I would have thought so. You certainly see the evidence of that. If it's not on the shelf, last time I looked, you couldn't sell it. So you have to put it on the shelf to sell it. So I do see that going up and up and up. I think the picture and the question is more complicated for a retailer, but for a CPG, definitely see the more on-shelf availability you have, the more sales you have, and that should just keep on going up and up and up. Maybe at 98%, maybe it tails off a bit. I don't know, but again, I think that presentation, that brand block being full, certainly all makes sense.
Is there like a stat, and not to put you in the spot, but I'm assuming it varies by category, but is it a spot that is for every increase in a percentage point of on-shelf availability that we're going to see a high correlation and an increase in sales from a sellout perspective?
So there used to be this thing, and I think Unilever created it, wasn't it? That for every 3% improvement in on-shelf availability, there was a 1% increase in sales.
That's fantastic. I think
that was but I think this is urban legend, though. I mean, I don't know whether, but I mean, it kind of makes sense. I think even sometimes it came down to it'll change by product, but every 2% increase in on-shelf availability. So you went from 96 to 98, it was a 1% sales increase. So that sort of legend. Whether that's real or not, I don't know.
Spot on, but I think it's worth it, right? We talked about how big this problem is. We talked about the complexity behind this problem around on-shelf availability, but then that brings experts like you to go, how do we go fix it, and how surgical do we need to be to ensure that we increase our sales? And I think that's why we're in this industry, and it's interesting. And thank you so much for sharing some of your insights, some of your experience.
We're just going to be much more open about sharing data between retailers and CPGs. That is the key to this, to unlocking this, not only sales data, but inventory data, shrink data, waste data. Very good.
Spot on it, especially as cameras and kind of image recognition start to be part of it. It will give us just a really clear, real-time x-ray of what is happening at the shelf. And then what do we need to do from a supply chain perspective, dependent on the category? I love the just-in-time, and I thought you brought some great points on labor as well. So thank you for sharing that, Colin. It's been a pleasure. You are one of the fathers, I'll call you, of on-shelf availability, and absolutely we gotta go fix it, because it's gonna bring a lot of value into the industry.
Well, I'll put that on my tombstone. Father of on-shelf availability.
Love it.
Thank you very much, Jorge. And good luck speaking
Colin.
to my friend Professor Daniel. He'll be with you soon.
Would love to, and thank you so much. Colin, thank you. It was great.
Thank you.
Great conversation as usual.